Hey there, sleuths. Welcome to the Detective's Den, your one-stop spot for unpacking mysteries, cracking cases, and diving deep into the unknown. I'm your name, and I'll be your guide on this investigative journey. Globe showing Europe, Africa. Now tell me, from which corner of the globe are you tuning in today? Drop your location in the comments below. Let's see just how far our detective network reaches. Chapter 1: The Venetian Invitation. The evening fog had settled thickly over London, its ghostly tendrils curling around gas lamps and muffling the distant clatter of hansom cabs. In his modest flat at Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot sat in a high-backed armchair by the fire, polishing his impeccably waxed moustache with the same care he devoted to the most delicate of investigations. A single oil lamp cast golden pools of light upon the Persian rug, throwing long shadows that danced upon the walls lined with leather-bound volumes. Outside, the muffled tick of Big Ben's quarter hour echoed through the quiet corridor, punctuating the hour with stately dignity. Poirot's companion, Captain Arthur Hastings, reclined at a small writing desk, scribbling the day's journal entries in neat, careful handwriting. Hastings paused mid-sentence to stretch, his pith helmet, a souvenir of dusty colonial posts, perched incongruously atop the desk. He glanced toward Poirot, who was humming softly to himself, lost in the symmetry of his beard. "Mon ami," Hastings ventured, "have you ever considered that your obsession with order borders on the theatrical?" Poirot set down his mustache comb, his eyes alight with amusement. "Theatrical? Ah, Hastings, you wound me." "Nonsense. Order is the very foundation upon which justice is built. Without order, chaos reigns, and the little grey cells, that is, the brain, cannot function. Harmony, symmetry, precision, these principles guide both my coiffure and my work." Hastings smiled indulgently and returned to his notes. Just then, a soft rap resonated at the door. Poirot raised an elegantly arched eyebrow. "Who calls at this hour?" he murmured. "Allow me, Hastings," said Poirot, rising with his characteristic grace. He crossed the room, picked up the ornate brass knocker, and tapped 3 deliberate raps, neither too loud nor too faint, as though the very knock must observe the dictates of good form. The door swung open to reveal a chambermaid bearing a silver tray. Upon it rested an envelope so striking in its craftsmanship that Poirot's small moustache quivered with anticipation. The parchment was pale cream, edged in platinum filigree, and sealed with a crimson wax seal bearing an intricately curled monogram, the intertwined initials MB. No postmark marred its pristine surface. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said softly, "you may leave it here." The chambermaid curtsied and retreated, her footsteps echoing down the carpeted hallway. Poirot returned to the armchair, gingerly lifting the envelope as though it were a Faberge egg. Hastings leaned forward, curiosity alight in his blue eyes. "What is it, Poirot?" Poirot traced the raised monogram with a fingertip. "An invitation, Hastings, but not just any invitation. Observe the weight of the parchment, the exactitude of the seal, and the absence of any postal imprint. One might deduce that it was delivered by hand, perhaps by a trusted messenger of considerable discretion. Hastings whistled softly. Delivered by hand, at this hour? Whoever the inviter is, they certainly adhere to ritual. Poirot pierced the seal with a slender letter opener and withdrew the card within. It was folded once to reveal a design of Venetian masks, golden, half-smiling, half-veiled, set against a midnight blue sky shot through with silver starlight. At the bottom, in looping calligraphy, the words, Madame la Comtesse Marjorie Beaumont requests the honor of Monsieur Hercule Poirot's presence at the midnight masquerade. Beaumont House, Saturday, 28th October, 11:30 p.m. Black tie and mask compulsory. Poirot's eyes brightened as he read. A masked ball in autumn, how delightfully evocative. And the hour, 11:30. Precisely when the air is most chill, when the spirits are most susceptible to both revelry and dread. Hastings tapped the card. Mask compulsory, you say? That suggests an evening of concealments, perhaps more than mere entertainment. You are suspicious. Always, Poirot smiled. But let us not jump to conclusions. The use of masks at a gathering implies an opportunity for anonymity. Secrets may be whispered, deals made in half-light, or even vengeance enacted in the confusion of swirling gowns and flaring torches. Hastings nodded slowly. Do we know Lady Beaumont? Poirot folded the card and placed it upon the mantel. I recall an announcement in the Times some months ago, the marriage of an American heiress, Marjorie Beaumont, to the Comte de la Croix, a minor French noble. She struck me then as spirited and determined to cement her place in English society. Since that announcement, little has circulated in the social columns beyond occasional mention of a glittering ball to celebrate their first anniversary. And this is an anniversary ball, yes? Hastings leaned back. Perhaps, Poirot conceded. Yet the title Midnight Masquerade suggests something more theatrical, an event planned for effect rather than mere festivity. The hour so late that only the bravest, or most reckless, guests would attend. Hastings laughed. Both descriptions seem apt for a ballroom filled with the bright young things of London. Poirot's expression turned contemplative. Bright young things, yes, the young aristocrats who flit from party to party, dancing under gramophones and drifting through morning papers in scandalous photographs. They thrive on novelty and excess. But excess often breeds contempt, and sometimes murder. Hastings started, pen poised over his notebook. Murder? Shall I jot that down? Poirot shook his head, rising to fetch the evening paper from a side table. No need, Hastings. Merely a warning to myself. When masks are worn, one must remember that appearances deceive. Tonight we shall see both the glittering surface and the shadows beneath. He placed the paper aside and turned toward the small writing desk. Hastings, fetch my overcoat and the chocolate eclair from the parlor fridge. I find that a light refreshment fortifies the mind for cases such as this. As Hastings obeyed, Poirot stood by the window, looking out upon the gaslit street. the fog thickened, swallowing lamp-posts and muffling the distant chime of carriage wheels. In that same fog, he wondered, a figure might pass quietly, one who neither belonged to the world of celebration nor to that of suspicion, but moved between both without sound or odor, intent on purposes known only to the heart, or to the little grey cells. Within the flat, the lamp's glow flickered as Hastings returned, bearing the éclair on a porcelain plate and Poirot's greatcoat at the ready. "Prepared, mon ami?" Poirot asked, rapping the coat's collar against an imagined chill. "Always," Hastings replied, "provided the éclair is still fresh." "A delectable aid to digestion," Poirot agreed, nibbling at the pastry. "Now, let us to Beaumont House. We shall arrive early, so that we may observe both comings and goings and take note of the servants and the masked chairs. Remember, Hastings, the most revealing glances are those that linger." He placed the éclair aside, buttoned his coat with deliberate precision, and, with the air of a conductor about to raise his baton, led the way into the mist. So began the midnight masquerade, an evening of gilded illusions and whispered truths, an evening that would test the power of disguise against the unerring logic of Hercule Poirot. And as the door closed softly behind them, the fog swallowed their footsteps, leaving only the promise of mystery in its silent wake. Chapter 2, Under the Glittering Chandelier. A carriage drew up before the wrought-iron gates of Beaumont House precisely at 11 o'clock, its wheels crunching on the frost-stiff gravel. The edifice rose before them in stately grandeur, honey-colored stone facades, tall mullioned windows glowing like lanterns in the fog, and sculpted gargoyles perched on corners, as though the very walls themselves watched for mischief. A pair of liveried footmen in midnight blue livery greeted Poirot and Hastings with crisp bows, their white gloves immaculate even in the chill of late October. "Good evening, monsieur," said the taller footman, extending a gloved hand toward Poirot's overcoat. "Lady Beaumont requests that you leave your cloaks here." Poirot nodded. "Merci," he murmured, removing his coat and placing it upon the velvet-draped stand. Hastings followed suit, glancing back at the carriage with a curious lift of his brow, as if uncertain whether retreating into the mask of the house was the safer choice. With a gentle tap of the footman's wand, the great oak doors swung inward on polished bronze hinges. They stepped into a vast marble vestibule, where a pair of flickering candelabra shed their golden glow across black and white tiles laid in a chessboard pattern. Across a broad sweep of red carpet, set between columns inlaid with veined marble, rose a grand staircase whose velvet runner absorbed every footstep into solemn hush. Poirot paused for a moment to survey the scene. "Le magnifique," he breathed to Hastings. "See how everything is arranged for maximum effect, light and shadow, straight lines and curves, the stately procession upon entrance." "Quite the entrance," Hastings agreed. "One almost expects a reception of princes rather than an afternoon, a night, soirée." "Precisely the anticipation Lady Beaumont wishes to cultivate," Poirot said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger to his moustache. "All the world's a stage, mon ami, and each of us plays our part. Here, the part is society's chosen luminary, bedecked in silks and diamonds." They were guided across the carpet and into the ballroom. At first glance, The room was dazzling beyond words, an opulent dome overhead, its coffered ceiling painted with cherubs and celestial swirls, while crystal chandeliers formed constellations of light that shimmered upon satin gowns and patent shoes. Mirrors lined the walls in gilded frames, creating the illusion of endless space. Music floated across the room like velvet, a quartet of strings playing a soft waltz that rippled through the air. Yet beneath the veneer of festivity, Poirot detected the subtle occurrence. A cluster of ladies in ermine-trimmed wraps pressed by the refreshment table, their beaded purses clutched like talismans. Young men in polished frock coats eyed them with a hunger that bordered on avarice. Near a silver-topped sideboard, a small knot of older gentlemen, bankers, solicitors, perhaps, exchanged hushed remarks over their sherry glasses. And by the far wall, where shadows pooled between columns, stood two figures utterly still, one a dark-haired woman in jade-green velvet, the other a thin man in morning dress whose pale eyes flicked from guest to guest. Hastings, who had made his way to the refreshment table, re-emerged with two silver chalices of champagne. He offered one to Poirot, who accepted with a genteel nod. "To a lovely evening," Hastings said, lifting his glass in toast. Poirot sipped, then set the chalice aside. "The bubble of champagne must not distract us from the underlying purpose of our appearance," he cautioned. "Observe, Hastings, the young woman in green. See how her mask is pushed back on her head, revealing more face than concealment. She desires attention, yet fears it too. And the gentleman to her left, his eyes are fixed upon her, but he does not approach. He is wary." Hastings turned to look. "Lady Beatrice Langley, I believe," he suggested. "A cousin of Lady Beaumont. Known for furious pride and a sharp tongue. And that man," Poirot continued, "is her brother, Sir Edgar. He has the air of a man who measures each guest as though they were cattle at market. Do you notice that no one crosses their path? They are formidable." Before Hastings could reply, a soft fanfare of trumpets sounded in the entrance hall, and the assembled guests turned en masse. Murmurs of excitement followed as Lord and Lady Beaumont entered, framed by a pair of footmen bearing lighted candlesticks. Lady Beaumont, Madame la Comtesse, though she wore no trace of French accent, was radiant in a dove-grey silk gown, the long train embroidered with silver thread that caught every flicker of light. Her mask was a delicate filigree of mother-of-pearl, shaped like a butterfly poised to take flight. Lord Beaumont, tall and sombre in evening coat, wore a slate-grey domino that lent him an air of mystery. With a stately bow, they took the dais beneath the ballroom's grand arch, and the music ceased. A hush fell, broken only by the soft rustle of silk and the glint of eager eyes. "My friends," Lady Beaumont's voice rang clear, "I bid you welcome to the midnight masquerade, an evening of enchantment, elegance, and above all, discretion. Let this night be one of laughter and marvels, but remember, behind every mask lies a secret. Let your hearts be light, and your tongues be quiet." Applause filled the room as the quartet lifted their bows and launched into a spirited Viennese waltz. Dance cards were produced, gloves removed, and in a matter of heartbeats the floor was swarmed with swirling forms. Music, laughter, and the click of heels melded into a dizzying symphony. Hastings marveled as they waltzed into the throng. "It's like a living kaleidoscope," he exclaimed. "So many colors, so many motions, all unpredictable." Poirot inclined his head. "And therein lies the danger, Hastings. In the swirl of distraction, one can be lost, or one can act without witnesses. A clash of fan and favor, an ill-concealed shove, or worse." He paused as a pair of dancers swept past, their masked faces mere slits of glass. "Observe that masked man in crimson cloak. He carries himself with such arrogance, yet he keeps glancing over his shoulder. He expects company, or fears pursuit." Hastings followed his gaze. A slender man with dark hair and a mustache, his mask of black domino edged in crimson piping, moved through the crowd with an easy grace but never lingered in one place longer than a breath. "I've seen him," Hastings said. "A banker, Mr. Julian Faraday. Known for his high-stakes loans to the theatre folk." Poirot's moustache quivered. "Aha! And those dancers we noted at the far corner, do you recognize them?" Hastings observed, a petite woman in lavender silk and a tall gentleman in charcoal tailcoat. "She's the actress I mentioned, Vivienne St. Clair. The man is her leading man, Roland Keane." A sudden hush fell near the doorway as a servant announced, "Midnight," with a sonorous gong. The music stuttered to a halt, and an expectant hush spread across the ballroom. Lady Beaumont raised her fans in a practiced gesture. "Midnight has come," she declared. "Let the masks be removed and the final dance begin." A ripple of surprise passed through the guests. Some glanced at their programs, others looked uncertainly at friends. Removing masks before the final dance? A bold twist indeed. Yet no one dared defy Lady Beaumont's direction. Poirot seized Hastings's arm. "Come, my friend. We shall reclaim our view at the balcony." With deft maneuvers, they ascended back up the grand staircase and passed through a side door onto a narrow marble gallery that overlooked the ballroom. From this vantage point they watched as guests, still flushed with the flush of the waltz, slowly pinned their masks to the plumes in their hair or tucked them into the folds of their gowns. A scattered murmur of anticipation ran through the crowd. All were unmasked, save for two, the dark-haired lady in jade and the man in mourning dress. They remained shrouded in mystery, as though neither dared trust the license of anonymity to reveal their faces. Poirot folded his arms. "Curious, n'est-ce pas? Most guests obey. These two refuse. They have reasons for clinging to concealment." Hastings leaned closer. "Perhaps they are conspirators. Or witnesses who fear recognition." Poirot studied the figures. "My money is on the latter. Observe how they hold themselves, she with a cool, imperious calm, he with restrained vigilance. They watch more than they participate. They know what has transpired, and what may yet transpire." Below them, Lady Beaumont raised her glass for a toast. "To masks removed, that truth may shine as brightly as our candles." Glasses chimed, the quartet struck up a sensuous tango. Yet for a moment time seemed suspended. Poirot, standing on that narrow gallery beneath the painted dome, breathed in the heady mixture of perfumed air and shifting allegiances. He closed his eyes briefly, picturing the night's tapestry, each thread of gossip, each glint of a diamond cufflink, every furtive smile. In that stillness before the final dance, he sensed that the evening's pattern was not yet complete. Something dark had brushed the edge of the revelry, something that would soon shatter the gilded illusion. Opening his eyes, he laid a calm hand upon Hastings's shoulder. "Hastings, the little grey cells tell me, tonight we will uncover more than the frivolities of a masked ball. We stand on the threshold of crisis. And at the stroke of dawn, secrets long buried may emerge from the shadows." Hastings nodded, heart pounding. Below them, as the music swelled once more and dancers entwined in the final, heady embrace of the night, a single crimson rose fell from the balcony railing at Poirot's feet, a silent herald of the darkness to come. Chapter 3. A Scream in the Roses. The waltz was drawing to its final, breathless close when the shrill cry shattered the music like glass. Poirot, standing at the edge of the ballroom, stiffened as the dancers froze mid-step. Hastings, across the floor, blinked in surprise. For a moment no one moved. Then a ripple of panic swept through the guests. Conversations stuttered and died. Footfalls hurried toward the double doors leading to the Rose Garden pavilion. Poirot and Hastings were among the first to cross the marble threshold. Outside, the night air was sharp, carrying the fragrance of damp earth and roses newly rained upon, yet beneath the sweetness, something acrid and metallic lingered. Moonlight pulled through the glass roof of the pavilion, illuminating a scene of dreadful stillness. At the center, beneath an iron gazebo entwined with climbing roses, lay the body of Vivienne St. Clair, stage star and belle of the season. Her silken gown, once pearlescent white, was now stained crimson at the throat. A single black carnation, its petals splayed like midnight wings, rested upon her bodice, stark against the blood-dark stain. Guests clustered at the edges of the pavilion, their masks forgotten in their hands. Lady Beaumont, breathless and pale, stood to one side beside Constance Vale, the society columnist whose pen scratched mercilessly at her notebook even now. Officer Grant, summoned moments before, held a lantern aloft, casting stark shadows across the twisted iron pillars and shattered petals. Poirot moved forward with deliberate calm. He bent at the waist, hands clasped behind him, and surveyed the body from head to toe without a flicker of emotion. Hastings hovered just behind, notebook in hand. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, voice low yet clear. "Two precise incisions to the carotid, no more, no less. A single blade used with cold deliberation." He paused to examine the carnation. We observed the killer's calling card, a symbol of bereavement or perhaps vengeance. But why a black carnation? Uncommon, imported, and priced dearly. A clue, Hastings, but for whom? Hastings knelt to inspect the ground. There's blood on the marble ledge, but look, no drops leading away. The assailant either wiped the weapon clean or left fire another route. Poirot's brow arched. Indeed. And no weapon in sight. Not even a fragment of blade. See how the wound is neatly trimmed, as though the blade were removed cleanly. A murderer with presence of mind, and a steady hand. Officer Grant approached, lowering the lantern. Detective Poirot, sir. No footprints other than those of the late Miss St. Clair and Mr. Keene. At whose discovery, I understand. Poirot prompted. Grant nodded. The actor Roland Keene, who was in the pavilion seeking air. He claims he found her moments ago. Keene stood apart, mask in hand, his usual hauteur replaced by ashen shock. His shirt front was immaculate, his tailored coat unruffled, as though nothing had happened. He swallowed visibly when Poirot approached. Mr. Keene, Poirot began, voice gentle but firm, you say you discovered Miss St. Clair's body. Pray, recount your movements. Keene's lips trembled. I left the ballroom for a breath of air. I felt stifled. The pavilion door was slightly ajar. I thought to admire the roses by moonlight. And then, I saw her. He swallowed again, glancing toward the body. Poirot observed the actor's reaction with sharp interest, no tears, only a rigid set to his jaw and a peculiar tension in his shoulders. Did you touch the body? Poirot asked. No, sir. Keene shook his head. I stayed back, I did not wish to disturb. His voice trailed off. Poirot nodded. Very good. Did you hear anything? A cry? Footsteps? Keene's brow furrowed. I heard nothing. No struggle. Only her final gasp, and then, the stillness. Fascinating, Poirot murmured. No sound except the wind through the roses. And yet someone inflicted a mortal wound. And left no sign of flight. He stood, smoothing his waistcoat. You did not see any other figure in the garden. Keene's hand tightened on his mask. No one. I was alone until I ran inside to call for help. Did you enter through the front of the pavilion? Poirot persisted. No, I used the side gate, the one near the servants' quarters. A convenient shortcut, Poirot noted. Yet the gate, he bent to inspect the ivy-clad latch, is locked from the outside. It appears someone left by that route. Tell me, Mr. Keene, do you possess the key? Keene paled. No, sir. Only the staff have keys. I borrowed one to enter, but I left it on a hook inside. Poirot touched the hook. Indeed. The key remains. And you left by the main door. Keene hesitated. Yes, but I did not want to startle the servants. Poirot raised a single eyebrow. Understandable. But in a matter of life and death, protocol yields to urgency. You passed no one on your way back. Keene shook his head with brittle insistence. No one. Poirot turned to Officer Grant. A search of the roof and grounds, at once. everywhere the killer might hide or dispose of the weapon. Grant nodded and strode off. Poirot returned his attention to the body. Hastings held a hand over his mouth. "It's horrible," Hastings whispered. Poirot's gaze was steady. "Indeed. But we must transform horror into evidence. For instance, see here." He pointed to a small, jagged fragment of glass near Vivienne's right hand. A piece of broken pane from the pavilion roof. The killer forced open a panel to gain entrance, or escape unnoticed. Hastings examined it with care. "So, someone climbed up, or reached through," Poirot amended. "The break is at shoulder height. A slender arm might reach inside and unlatch the door. They step back, break the glass to mask their exit, and vanish into the night." "A cunning plan," Hastings breathed. "And the rose petals crushed beneath her foot?" That suggests she was surprised. "Precisely." Poirot rose, brushing invisible dust from his cuffs. "She did not see the blade until it was too late. But note the position of the petals, pressed flat beneath her heel. She did not stumble. She stood firm, perhaps confronting her attacker briefly." He turned to the gathered guests, who peered through the glass walls. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called, voice calm yet carrying across the hush, "I must ask you all to remain here, in the pavilion, until the authorities have taken statements. The visitor who fled through the side gate, but entered through the door, likely remains among us." A murmur of anxiety rippled through the crowd. Lady Beaumont stepped forward, gloved hands clasped. "Detective Poirot, will the police search the entire estate?" "In due course," Poirot replied. "But now, we must begin with those who had motive and opportunity. I ask one among you, who last saw Miss St. Clair alive?" Hastings unleashed a flutter of note cards. "I saw her at the refreshment table, moments before the last waltz," ventured Miss Vale. "I noticed her speaking with Julian Faraday, the banker," said Sir Edgar Langley. They appeared earnest. A dozen hands shot up with competing recollections, an overheard argument, a flirtatious glance, an unpaid debt. Each witness spoke, Poirot drawing each detail into the net of his mind. Yet his most penetrating glance returned to Roland Keene, whose stiff composure betrayed more than he admitted. He allowed the chatter to dwindle, then addressed Keene directly. "You remain calm, sir, too calm. Tell me, what did Miss St. Clair hold in her right hand when you found her?" Keene's eyes flickered. "Nothing, sir." Poirot shook his head. "Indeed? Yet here, beneath this rose petal, is the metal clasp of a compact. She must have dropped it in surprise." He produced it carefully. A compact embossed with her initials, V.S. found clasped down, as though she fumbled at her purse moments before her death. Gasps echoed. Poirot held the compact by its hinge and flipped it open to reveal unbroken mirror and empty powder trays. No powder, no makeup. She was not preparing for vanity, but for a final glance, perhaps to see her attacker, perhaps to compose herself. He closed it and tucked it into his coat pocket. The weapon, the broken glass, the calling card, the discarded compact, all point to a calculated deed. A lover's quarrel? A blackmail attempt gone wrong? Or a premeditated assassination disguised by melodrama? He stared into the crowd, maskless faces lit by lantern light. One among you knows more than has been said. And that truth shall reveal itself, either voluntarily or under the scrutiny of justice. With a courteous nod, Poirot turned to Hastings. Mon ami, we have much work ahead. But remember, in darkness and blood, the tiniest detail shines like a beacon. We shall follow each glimmer until this matter is resolved. Hastings dipped his pen in ink. Very well, Poirot. Shall we begin our rounds? Poirot gave him a gentle smile. Yes, Hastings. We shall begin with Mr. King, and end with the little grey cells. Outside the pavilion, the night pressed close, and the roses trembled as though bearing silent witness to secrets far deeper than their blossoms. Inside, Poirot took one last, steadying breath before stepping toward the first of many questions, and the first of many lies that must be unmasked. Chapter 4: The First Interviews. The morning light filtered pale and trembling through the lace curtains of Beaumont House's morning room, illuminating motes of dust that danced like tiny spectres above the assembled company. Outside, the shrill cry of a distant blackbird punctuated the hush that had settled over the grand estate since Vivienne St. Clair's body was discovered. Inside, the air was heavy with whispered conjecture, drawing Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings once more into the heart of the mystery. Lady Beaumont had graciously offered her private morning room for questioning. A thick Persian carpet muffled footsteps, and the silken damask walls seemed to absorb every tremor of tension. 2 constables stood by the door, their truncheons tucked into their belts, while guests, pallid and anxious, waited in chairs arranged in a rough semicircle. Poirot took his place at the head of the room, hands clasped behind his back, moustache immaculately waxed as ever. At his side, Hastings dropped into a high-backed chair, notebook in hand. Across from them sat Roland Keene, still dressed in last night's morning coat despite the hour. His dark hair, rumpled in disorder, and his usually precise collar now slightly askew, lent him the air of a man whose world had irrevocably shifted. Poirot's black eyes surveyed him with calm gravity. "Monsieur Keene," he began, voice low yet carrying, "thank you for joining us once more. We are grateful for your cooperation." He inclined his head in polite deference. Keene's jaw worked restlessly. I will tell you everything I know." "Excellent," Poirot replied. "First, please describe your last conversation with Miss St. Clair. You told us you spoke with her near the refreshment table just before midnight." Keene swallowed, glancing toward the lace-draped window. "Yes. We had been rehearsing the new play together, and she confided that she feared for her reputation. She said someone in our company, had threatened to expose a secret." "A secret concerning Miss St. Clair?" Poirot prompted. Keene nodded. "She refused to say more. She only whispered a name, something like Langley, but she cut herself off before I could ask. Langley, Poirot murmured, tapping a finger to his moustache. Lady Beatrice Langley and her brother Sir Edgar are present. We shall certainly question them. Tell me, Monsieur Keene, did Miss St. Clair seem frightened? The actor hesitated, his fingers twisting in his lap. Yes, monsieur. She glanced over her shoulder and lowered her voice. Then she laughed it off, but I saw the tremor in her hand. He squeezed his eyes shut. I should have stayed with her. Poirot sighed gently. Hindsight, mon ami, is always precise. Now, after you left her, you entered the pavilion. Did you notice anyone else in the rose garden? No one, Keene said too quickly. He paused, then swallowed again. There was a rustle, perhaps a gown brushing against the roses, but I thought it the wind. Did you examine the broken pane of glass? Poirot asked. Keene shook his head. I was in shock. I ran to find help. His voice cracked. I did not think to look. Poirot nodded. Very well. You may step outside, Monsieur Keene. We shall summon you again if needed. He offered a calming bow, and Keene stumbled from the room, shoulders hunched, as though expecting blame. No sooner had the door closed than the maid ushered in Lady Beaumont, composed now in a simple black dress, her mask discarded but concealing no hint of former gaiety. She paused by the hearth, hands folded over a lace handkerchief. Lady Beaumont, Poirot began, seating himself behind a small mahogany table, you inherited this house only last year. Yet your caution with the rose garden gate suggests you anticipated no disturbance. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I saw to every precaution. The gate was locked at 10, and only the servants hold the key. She drummed a fingertip against her handkerchief. I never imagined violence. Understandable, Poirot said softly. But Miss St. Clair was free to roam here. Did she ever quarrel with anyone in your household, staff or guests? Lady Beaumont inhaled. Only with Sir Edgar Langley. She accused him of shady dealings, gambling debt, I believe. They exchanged harsh words at dinner last week. Poirot's eyebrow quirked. A public quarrel? She nodded. She called him a vulture in tails within earshot of half the table. With a polite nod, Poirot rose. Thank you, Lady Beaumont. We may speak again. The Countess curtsied and withdrew, her slender figure swallowed by the corridor's gloom. Next came Constance Vale, the society columnist, mask in hand and notebook at the ready. Her cheeks were flushed with the thrill of scandal, an emotion Poirot observed with mild disapproval. Miss Vale, he greeted, you heard Lady Beaumont mention Sir Edgar. Pray, elaborate on your own observations from last night. Vale leaned forward, voice quick and excited. Indeed, Poirot, I was at Vivienne's side before the waltz. She seemed anxious, checked her pocketbook several times and cast wary glances. She whispered that a letter awaited her in the pavilion, something she feared to open. A letter? Poirot mused. Have you any idea from whom? Vale tapped her notebook. No signature, but the postmark bore the crest of Langley Manor. Poirot inclined his head. Thank you. That is most illuminating. You may go, Miss Vale. Her eyes shone. Do let me know if you need a quote for tomorrow's column. Poirot offered a stiff bow as she departed. Hastings scribbled furiously. Finally, the door opened for Sir Edgar Langley and Lady Beatrice, who entered arm in arm. He was tall, his cheeks hollow beneath dark hair, she, shorter, with ice-blue eyes that gazed across the room with steely calculation. Poirot gestured to two chairs. Sir Edgar, Lady Beatrice, thank you for coming. We understand you and Miss St. Clair had disagreements. Sir Edgar's mouth tightened. She accused me of extorting funds from the theatre company. Ridiculous slander. Yet serious enough to provoke threats. Poirot asked kindly. Beatrice leaned forward. Vivienne was reckless. She flouted decorum on stage and off. She owed money, debts to bankers, loans from unsavory characters. Edgar confronted her, but never with violence. Poirot's eyes flicked to Sir Edgar. Can you account for your whereabouts at the time of the murder? Sir Edgar glanced at his sister, then replied curtly, I was in the library, reviewing business papers with Lord Beaumont. Several witnesses can confirm. Poirot made a meticulous note. Very good. And Lady Beatrice, you remained at the supper table until the final dance. She swept him a cool glance. Yes. I have no reason to linger in the rose garden. She rose and swept from the room. As the door closed, Poirot turned to Hastings, expression thoughtful. Ah. So we have motive aplenty, threats overheard, debts mounting, a mysterious letter, and public quarrels. Yet no evidence to pin it upon any one person, only a tangle of resentments. Hastings sighed. And the black carnation? Who would send such a dramatic message? A lover scorned, or a creditor enraged, Poirot mused. Our next step is to locate the horticulturist who supplies black carnations. Rarity often indicates a limited circle. He glanced at his watch. Come, Hastings. We shall visit the greenhouse and question the servants' quarters. The first interviews have yielded intrigue, but no answers. The truth awaits in the petals of a single flower or the tremor of an unguarded glance. As they left the morning room, the hush reclaimed the space, leaving behind the heavy scent of uneasy secrets. And within the shadows of Beaumont House, the tangled web of motive and opportunity lay waiting for Poirot's little grey cells to unravel. Chapter 5: Secrets Behind the Masks. By mid-afternoon the great hall of Beaumont House had emptied, its chandeliers unlit, its music stilled. Yet in the panelled gallery above, a smaller, more intense gathering pressed close to the balustrade, peering down into the silent ballroom as though the mirrored walls might yet echo with last night's tragedy. At the head of this gallery stood Hercule Poirot, his posture perfect, his little grey cells already whirring with all he had observed. Beside him was Captain Hastings, notebook at the ready, looking every bit the faithful scribe. Around them formed a semicircle of the house's key guests. Julian Faraday, the financier in the crimson-trimmed cloak. Lady Beatrice Langley, pale in jade velvet. Sir Edgar Langley, stern beneath his half-mask. Constance Vale, pen poised above her notebook. Penelope Cushing, Lady Beaumont's dear friend, whose laughter had seemed unruffled at last night's ball. Mr. Isaac Hartwell, a merchant with florid cheeks and eager eyes. Mrs. Marguerite Coulson, the head gardener, whose greying hair was bound in a neat chignon. Poirot raised a gloved finger for silence. Mesdames et messieurs, I thank you for assembling so promptly. We must now delve beneath the beauty of yesterday's mask, and uncover the secrets that lie hidden behind each mask. Please remain candid, for every half-truth prolongs our inquiry, and every full truth brings us nearer to justice. He turned first to Mr. Hartwell. Monsieur Hartwell, you are new to high society, yet you were observed in earnest conversation with Miss St. Clair shortly before her death. Pray explain. Hartwell swallowed, glancing around. I was but a humble merchant, monsieur. Vivienne, Miss St. Clair, spoke to me of a business proposition. She wished to invest in exotic orchids for her dressing room. I mentioned the black carnation as a novelty, a rarity. She seemed intrigued and asked if I could procure one. Black carnations, Poirot murmured. A curious interest for an actress renowned for her alabaster beauty. He tapped his moustache. And did you secure such a specimen for her? Hartwell's cheeks reddened. I ordered one from Mrs. Coulson's greenhouse, at great expense. It arrived this morning. He passed Poirot a paper ticket stamped with a delivery date. But by then she was dead. Poirot nodded gravely. Thank you, monsieur. You may step aside. Hartwell fell back into the crowd, visibly relieved to remain only a suspect by proximity, not by action. Poirot's gaze turned to Mrs. Coulson, the gardener. Madame Coulson, you cultivate many rare blooms. Tell us, who ordered black carnations from you? Her eyes darted to Hartwell. Mr. Hartwell placed the order on Miss St. Clair's behalf. I supplied 2 blooms, but they were to be delivered only at dawn, as he stipulated. Yet the single black carnation upon the body was much older, a bloom I last saw on the south terrace only 2 nights ago. It should have wilted by now. Ah. Poirot smiled thinly. An older bloom, transplanted as a calling card. Someone took that carnation from your terrace and delivered it to the pavilion, presumably at the moment of death. He folded his arms. Madame Coulson, does anyone else have access to your greenhouse? She hesitated. My assistant, Thomas Redding. He often works late into the evening. He sometimes helps himself to cuttings, though I have warned him against unauthorized harvesting. Poirot turned to the group. We shall question Master Redding next. But for now, let us speak with those whose last words to Miss St. Clair were spoken behind closed doors. He summoned Lady Beatrice Langley forward. She stepped with icy grace, her mask now pinned to her gown. Poirot inclined his head. "Lady Beatrice, you and Miss St. Clair exchanged heated words last week. Did those words reflect deeper animosity?" Lady Beatrice's lips curved into a sardonic smile. "Vivienne had a habit of accusing me of theft, of borrowing dresses without asking. I merely confronted her. No more than that." "Indeed?" Poirot's eyebrows rose. "And yet last night, you were seen near the Rose Garden gate mere minutes before the tragedy." Her eyes narrowed. "I needed air. The masks felt suffocating. I walked the grounds, and passed through that gate, which I believed unlocked. I lingered for 10 minutes, then returned to the ballroom." "Can anyone confirm your return?" asked Hastings. She shrugged. "I passed Lord Beaumont in the corridor. He glanced but said nothing." She turned her gaze away, cool and unrepentant. Poirot made a note. "Thank you, Lady Beatrice. You may rejoin the others." Next, he addressed Sir Edgar Langley, whose stony features betrayed little. "Sir Edgar, you were seen speaking to Lord Beaumont in the library until nearly midnight. Yet you emerge unmasked, your attire immaculate. Pray tell, did you leave the library after your discussion?" Sir Edgar's jaw tightened. "I excused myself to fetch a refreshment. I returned promptly. I did not leave the house." "Yet your sister saw you pacing outside the greenhouse, no more than 20 minutes before the body was discovered." Poirot's tone was gentle. "A man of your stature would not loiter in the night air without purpose." Sir Edgar's gaze flickered. I sought clarity. Vivienne and I had business disagreements. But I would never harm her." Poirot nodded, unconvinced but patient. "We shall verify your statement with library staff. You may step aside." At this point Poirot beckoned Julian Faraday, the banker. Faraday approached, fingers idly toying with his mask. Poirot offered him a chair. "Mr. Faraday, you loaned considerable sums to Miss St. Clair. Is this true?" Faraday's lips curled into a wetted smile. "A charming woman, Miss St. Clair, too charming, perhaps. I extended credit, believing her contract assured repayment. When she delayed payment, I reminded her of the consequences." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Consequences, public disgrace? You threatened to expose her debts in the columns. Business, Poirot, not malice. Yet she refused to settle. My letters went unanswered. Did you visit her in the pavilion to demand payment?" Poirot asked. Faraday sat back. I did go to speak with her, but only to entreat her favorably. I left when she refused. I heard laughter from within, then silence. I thought better of entering unannounced." "Nonetheless," Poirot said softly, you possess motive, opportunity, and financial leverage. We shall need your account in writing." As Faraday rejoined the group, Poirot turned to Constance Vale. "Miss Vale, as chronicler of society's sins, you must have observed something the rest of us missed. You overheard Miss St. Clair's whispered concerns. Tell us more." Miss Vale's pen raced. "Yes. She spoke of a letter she found in the pavilion, a letter bearing the seal of Langley Manor. She said it contained instructions. Something that frightened her deeply." "How did you learn of this letter?" Hastings interjected. Vale hesitated. "I saw her slip it into her pocket. She meant to open it later, but she never had the chance." Poirot nodded. "Then our inquiry extends to the secrecy within those envelopes. I shall request the seal from Lady Beatrice. Miss Vale, please produce any notes you have regarding its appearance." As Vale hurried away, Poirot surveyed the assembly. One by one, he crossed names from his inner ledger, though none, yet, fell into the box marked, "Culprit certain." He drew a deep breath. "Mesdames et messieurs, you have all provided valuable testimony. Yet I sense each of you carries another secret, untold. Our next step is to question the servants who repaired the broken pane and the greenhouse assistant who could wield that black carnation like a token of death." He turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, gather your notes. I shall speak with Mrs. Coulson's assistant and the footman who escorted Lady Beatrice through the gate. These minor players often hold the key." Hastings nodded, scribbling furiously. Poirot paused, gaze drifting across the masked faces, now unmasked and weary. "In life, we wear many masks," he said quietly. "In death, often none. The truth, like a rose's thorn, wounds those who hide behind facades. Soon these masks will fall, and what we find beneath will astonish us all." With that, Poirot descended the gallery steps, his mind already piecing together the fragile puzzle of black blooms, whispered debts, and the deadly dance between darkness and light. The masks might cling to their wearers, but Poirot's little grey cells would tear them away, petal by petal, until only the barest truth remained. Chapter 6: A Clue in the Carnation. The sun lay low in the October sky as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings made their way down the gravel path toward the glass-roofed greenhouse that adjoined Beaumont House's west wing. The morning's frost had already melted, leaving the air damp with the scent of earth and foliage, an aroma that combined comfortingly with the lingering tension of the murder investigation. Hastings carried a satchel of notebooks. Poirot, as ever, clutched his handkerchief, ready to dab at perspiration even in the chill. "Tell me, Hastings," Poirot said, eyes bright beneath his bowler hat, "what do we know of the black carnation?" Hastings consulted his notes. "A rare cultivar imported from South America, expensive, slow-growing, and prized for its deep ebony hue. Mrs. Coulson grows many unusual blooms, but she said the one on the body was older than the fresh delivery Mr. Hartwell ordered." "Exactly," Poirot murmured. "2 black carnations, one ordered at dawn for Miss St. Clair's dressing room, and one cut 2 nights ago, left to mature. the latter became the killer's calling card. They reached the greenhouse door, where Mrs. Marguerite Coulson, head gardener, awaited them in a moss-green smock, soil under her fingernails despite white gloves. Her face was drawn but resolute, as though she had resolved to aid the investigation at any personal cost. "Detective Poirot, Captain Hastings," she greeted, inclining her head. "I understand you wish to inspect the black carnations." "Thank you, Madame Coulson," Poirot replied. "May we see the specimen bed?" She led them inside, where sunlight, filtered by cloud, danced upon dew-laden leaves. The air was warm, humid, nourishing. Rows of tropical orchids and exotic lilies filled the center of the glass pavilion. To one side, a small bed of carnations, their stems supported by slender stakes. Among them, a single black bloom drooped elegantly, its petals unmarked by wilt. Poirot approached it, stooping to inhale its faint fragrance. "Notice, Hastings, how the petals still retain their rigidity." "Madame Coulson, when did you cut this bloom from the stock?" "3 nights ago, as you know," she said softly. "I returned to troubleshoot a fungus outbreak, and took a single carnation to examine in my work table. I did not dry it. I intended to discard it once I confirmed the sample was clear. Yet someone retrieved that bloom and carried it to the rose garden pavilion." Poirot rose and turned to her. "Madam, who else had access to these greenhouses after dark?" Her lips trembled. "Only Thomas Redding, my assistant. He sometimes works late, under my supervision, but he has his own key." "Thomas Redding," Poirot repeated, turning to Hastings. "A young man with opportunity." He beckoned to the stable wing, and they found Redding clad in a paint-splattered waistcoat, perched on a stool in the potting shed. Upon seeing Poirot, he jumped to his feet, cheeks pale. "Master Redding," Poirot said gently, "we understand you sometimes work alone in the greenhouse after hours." Redding swallowed. "Yes, monsieur. Madame Coulson often departs early. I stay to finish tasks, pruning, watering, repotting." "Did you see anyone remove a black carnation 3 nights past?" Poirot pressed. Redding's gaze flickered to the floor. I recall Madame Coulson took a sample for study. After that, I did nothing. I have nothing to do with Miss St. Clair's death." "Then tell me," Poirot leaned in, voice soft yet insistent, "did you notice this bloom missing from its stake on the morning of the ball?" Redding's eyes widened. "Missing? No, nobody told me. I only saw the fresh flowers delivered later." Hastings frowned. "But Madame Coulson said the mature bloom vanished from your greenhouse bed." I must have been distracted," Redding stammered. "I was preparing the new orchids. I didn't notice. A bloom could have fallen." Poirot tapped his moustache. "A bloom does not wander on its own. Someone who knew of your care for the plants, took it. You, Master Redding, you know the properties of this greenhouse better than any other servant." The break in the pavilion roof was at near shoulder height. A slender arm could reach through to unlatch the door. Redding paled further. "Monsieur, I have the key to the side gate, too. But I never leave the grounds after dark." "Yet the murderer did," Hastings interjected, "exiting through the side gate after committing the deed." Poirot nodded. "We now understand the path. The killer entered the pavilion through the broken pane, removed the black carnation from your greenhouse, and delivered it as a token. Then, after the shooting, they passed back through the gate into the grounds, leaving no footprints in the dewy grass." "Extraordinary," Redding whispered, gaze darting. "Not extraordinary," Poirot corrected softly. "Calculated." The black carnation was both symbol and misdirection. "We must ask, who among the guests knew of your greenhouses, and knew of your night work?" He turned back to Madame Coulson. "Madame, have any guests commented on your carnations before?" She hesitated. "Mr. Hartwell, as you noted, inquired yesterday. But also, Vivienne St. Clair visited here the previous week. She admired the black blooms and took several cuttings." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, Miss St. Clair herself had knowledge of these flowers. Someone wished to pervert her admiration into a sign of mourning. Or vengeance," Madame Coulson added quietly. Poirot smiled thinly. "Precisely. Now, I would like to inspect the servants' quarters, and especially the key rack. Not merely yours and Redding's, but those of the footmen who might circulate keys among themselves." They departed the greenhouse, passing into a narrow corridor that led toward the stables and service wings. Here, the world of velvet and laughter faded into broom handles, coal scuttles, and staff portraits. Poirot paused at the key cabinet, a wooden rack of hooks labeled with names and locations. He removed the keys to the greenhouse and the side gate. "Note the wear on these," he murmured, handing them to Hastings. "Redding's main greenhouse key, newly cut, its teeth sharp and unblemished. The gate key is older, dog-eared, carried habitually. Whoever turned the latch had the genuine item." Hastings examined them. "Meaning our killer was likely a servant, or someone with access to the master key ring. Or someone who borrowed a servant's key," Poirot countered. "But the key you borrowed, Monsieur Keene, unlocked only the pavilion door from inside. You left it on the hook thereafter. No one else holds that key." Hastings nodded. "So the killer must have used Redding's greenhouse key, and a second servant's key for the gate. Perhaps the same servant has unlocked the gate last night." Poirot's finger tapped the key rack. "We must question the footman on duty, Joseph Clark and William Peters. One of them performed both tasks. They located Clark polishing boots near the stables. After a brief but firm entreaty, he admitted that Commander Faraday had requested the use of a greenhouse key to retrieve some flowers for his table, and that he had lent him Redding's key." "Faraday?" Poirot said softly. "Yet he had his own key to the drawing room. Why fetch from the greenhouse?" Clark shrugged. "He said the orchids were stale. He wanted something fresh, for luncheon." Hastings frowned. But why not use fresh flowers from the conservatory? Clark shrugged again, indecisively. Poirot released him. Thank you. Next, they found William Peters near the kitchen entrance. He, too, admitted loaning the gate key, twice, to Lady Beatrice, so that she might stroll in the gardens at whim. He had seen her return from the pavilion gate just after midnight. All right, Hastings muttered. Both keys were lent, to Faraday and Lady Beatrice. Poirot nodded. The convergence of those two persons, neither of whom I yet suspect fully. And Redding's key was used by our killer, who knew of the greenhouse. He paused, gaze sharpening. Now, Hastings, I believe we have a meeting of opportunity. Someone borrowed Redding's key, whether from Clark or Redding himself, entered the greenhouse, took the black carnation, proceeded to the pavilion, committed the murder, and escaped through the side gate. Hastings whistled. But which of the three, Faraday, Lady Beatrice, or the servant, had motive to plant the black carnation? Faraday for money, Beatrice for spite, or the servant for loyalty to Vivienne? Precisely, Poirot said, tapping his moustache in thought. And perhaps another suspect lies hidden amid these keys, even one we have not yet considered. He turned to Madame Coulson. Thank you, Madam. Your greenhouse has revealed a vital pathway. We shall call Thomas Redding and the footman again, and then, perhaps most crucially, we shall request that Miss Beatrice and Mr. Faraday bring their keys to the drawing room, so that fingerprints may reveal who touched both keys after dark. Madame Coulson inclined her head and withdrew. As Poirot and Hastings walked back toward the house, the detective's mind raced through every detail, the rare bloom, the borrowed keys, the broken glass, and the concealed motives. In that complexity lay the killer's identity, waiting patiently for Poirot's little grey cells to assemble the final picture. And as the first shadows of evening darkened the path, Poirot whispered to Hastings, in this case, my friend, the smallest bloom has flourished into the grandest of revelations. Tonight, we shall see who among our suspects cannot escape the fragrance of guilt. Chapter 7, The Unmasking. Late that evening, the grand ballroom of Beaumont House lay in hushed readiness. The chandeliers shone, unlit now, but their crystal prisms caught the flicker of dozens of candles set upon silver sconces. Chairs, arranged in a wide semicircle, awaited an audience, while a single rose, blackened and stiff with age, rested on a satin-covered pedestal beneath the dome. It was here that Hercule Poirot summoned the household and its principal guests for the denouement. Captain Hastings stood at Poirot's side, notebook closed, face taut with anticipation. Around them sat Lady Marjorie Beaumont, pale yet poised beside her husband. Sir Edgar and Lady Beatrice Langley, their expressions guarded. Roland King, shoulders slumped in formal coat. Julian Faraday, the banker, mask in hand, his countenance inscrutable. Constance Vale, pen poised over her faithful notebook. Penelope Cushing, whose laughter had once seemed ever present. Thomas Redding, the gardener's assistant, whose eyes darted anxiously. Joseph Clark and William Peters, the footman who held the keys. A hush fell as Poirot stepped forward, tapping a gloved finger to his moustache. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began in his precise, measured tones, "you have each contributed pieces to this intricate puzzle. Tonight, the little grey cells will reveal the final picture, one of betrayal rather than love, and of a calling card not of mourning, but of menace." He turned first to the pedestal and lifted the black carnation. This bloom, you will recall, was plucked from Madame Coulson's greenhouse days before the crime. It was delivered to the pavilion as a token, yet of what? Bereavement? No. Of vengeance. He walked slowly along the semicircle, gaze sharp. We learned that this flower could only have been moved by someone with access to Redding's greenhouse key and to the lodge gate key. The former was borrowed by Mr. Julian Faraday from the footman clerk, on the pretext of fresh flowers for his luncheon. The latter was loaned to Lady Beatrice by Peters, so that she might stroll the grounds at will. Yet neither of them is the true culprit. A soft murmur rippled through the guests. Faraday's lip curled imperceptibly, Beatrice's brow furrowed. Poirot paused before Roland Keene. "Mr. Keene, you told us you entered the pavilion through the front door, leaving the lace window intact. But for 2 weeks prior, you claimed to have rehearsed there. Why not enter through the side gate? You are not our murderer." Keene looked up in surprise. "Poirot." "Patience, my friend," Poirot smiled. "The truth is not found in haste." He advanced to Lady Beatrice. "Lady Beatrice, your credit is impeccable, and your resentment of Miss St. Clair well known. Yet you had no need for the theatrics of a black carnation. You borrowed the gate key, yes, but you did not borrow Redding's greenhouse key. That one was taken from Clark's charge. You, my dear, remained confined to your salon all evening." She stiffened but gave no reply. "Madame Cushing," he addressed Penelope Cushing, "you laughed as though witnessing mere melodrama. Yet the sliver of glass at the pavilion roof was your undoing. The shard matched the broken pane in the conservatory you once admired, not the greenhouse. You are not the culprit." Cushing paled, her amusement drained. He turned finally to Julian Faraday, motioning for him to stand. "Monsieur Faraday," Poirot said quietly, "you had motive, large sums advanced to Miss St. Clair, repayment overdue, her reputation your collateral. You threatened her reputation in print if she failed to pay. You had opportunity, you borrowed the greenhouse key from Clark, claiming stale orchids. You had the gate key, you borrowed it this evening, did you not, from Peters, ostensibly to escort a friend?" Faraday's jaw clenched. He shot a glance at Peters, who nodded miserably. Poirot continued, "You used Redding's key to enter the greenhouse. You plucked the black carnation, the same mature bloom Madame Coulson had set aside, and carried it to the rose garden pavilion as a token of your wrath, disguised as mourning. There, you confronted Miss St. Clair." He paused, letting the accusation settle like dust on the silent floor. "In the pavilion, you forced open the pane with this very shard." Poirot produced a fragment of curved glass, "and when Miss St. Clair dared to defy you, you plunged your weapon, a small pistol, later found hidden beneath the rose bushes, into her throat with clinical precision. Hastings, stepping forward, produced a leather holster. "And here, Poirot, is the pistol we recovered, its barrel blackened, its stocks failing to match Faraday's gloves. But the fingerprints on the trigger guard match those found on the greenhouse key." Faraday's face turned ashen, his composure crumbling. He met Poirot's unwavering gaze. "Why resort to murder?" Poirot's voice was gentle. "Was it financial ruin you feared, or the humiliation of unreturned loans made public in the gossip columns?" He glanced at Constance Vale. "Miss Vale, you claim to have taken notes on a letter sealed in the pavilion. That letter was a summons, written by Faraday, instructing Miss St. Clair to meet him once more. You saw her slip it into her pocket, unaware it bore the banker's crest." Vale's pen hovered. She swallowed, tears bright in her eyes. Faraday's shoulders sagged. He whispered, "She promised to repay, promised, but I received nothing. Pride and fear. I lost control." Poirot inclined his head. "And so you believed that extinguishing her would spare you disgrace? A tragic miscalculation." Faraday sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Sir Edgar Langley moved to remove the black carnation from its stand, then crushed it beneath his heel. Poirot surveyed the room. "The masks are gone, yet the scars remain. Justice will see you tried, Monsieur Faraday. But let this serve as a reminder, money and reputation, though prized, cannot match the value of human life." He turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, please notify Chief Inspector Grant. And Captain, ensure the weapon and keys are lodged in evidence. Our task here is done." As the footman moved forward to see to the details, Poirot stepped back, gaze drifting to Lady Beaumont. She offered him a grateful nod, sorrow etched upon her features. Hastings placed a hand upon Poirot's shoulder. "Bravo, my friend. Another riddle resolved." Poirot's small smile was one of both relief and melancholy. "The denouement is always bittersweet, Hastings. We restore order, yet at the cost of a life lost, hopes shattered, and secrets forever buried. Now let us leave these halls, where masks once hid the darkest intentions, and seek rest for our weary hearts." With that, Hercule Poirot and his faithful companion departed the ballroom, leaving behind the final echoes of a tragedy unmasked at last. Chapter 8, Order Restored. The trial of Julian Faraday was scheduled for the first week of November at the Old Bailey. In the days leading up to it, London's morning papers buzzed with speculation. A respected financier turned murderer? Society columns debated whether Faraday's name and family crest would survive the scandal. Yet for Hercule Poirot, the matter was already settled in the little grey cells. Now it was only a matter of procedure and public spectacle. The arrest and the confession. Within 24 hours of the unmasking in the Beaumont ballroom, Faraday was quietly taken into custody at his Mayfair club by Inspector Grant. He offered no resistance. In his private rooms, Surrounded by leather-bound ledgers and gleaming silver inkwells, he met Poirot's gaze with a weary resignation. "I believed she would never forgive her debts," Faraday confessed in measured tones. "Her promises seemed endless. When I saw her in the pavilion, the letter in her hand, I thought to scare her into compliance. But when she recoiled, I panicked." He bowed his head. I shot her twice. Once to silence, once to ensure it was done." Poirot's face, always a mask of calm authority, softened. "Monsieur," he said gently, "you mistook desperation for necessity. Yet murder is never the answer." Faraday offered a brittle apology. "I am a ruined man." Public furore and private reflection. As the news broke, Lady Beaumont found her salon besieged by intrusive calls and jostling visitors. Penelope Cushing, once her dearest friend, quietly withdrew her invitations. Constance Vale's column, uncharacteristically sympathetic, spoke of a tragedy born of human frailty. Yet the salons of Belgravia buzzed with gossip. Was Faraday sane? Did anyone truly sympathize with Vivienne St. Clair? Captain Hastings, ever loyal to Poirot, visited Faraday at Newgate Prison on the eve of the trial. He returned pale. "He has accepted his fate with stoicism," Poirot, Hastings reported. "Yet I could see remorse in his eyes." Poirot nodded. "Regret is at least evidence of conscience, Hastings. We shall see how the jury views his act." The trial begins. On a blustery November morning, the courthouse steps gleamed wet with rain. Reporters jostled for position. A small crowd pressed the railings. Inside, the dock held Faraday in a dark suit, hands folded before him. His counsel, a silver-haired barrister, rose to plead diminished responsibility. "My lord, my client acted under extreme emotional duress, believing his livelihood and honor at stake. He did not plot murder in cold blood, but snapped under intolerable pressure." The prosecution, by contrast, painted a vivid picture of premeditation: the borrowed keys, the broken pane, the calling card carnation, the stolen pistol. They stressed that Faraday had both motive and opportunity, and that dread of ruin did not excuse the taking of innocent life. All the while, Poirot sat with Hastings in the public gallery, silent as stone pillars. As witnesses recounted Faraday's confession, the judge's gavel fell like thunder, and the jurors, 12 faces pale with solemn duty, took notes in unison. Verdict and repercussions. After 3 days of testimony and a day of summing up, the jury retired. Hours later, they returned, guilty as charged. A collective hush filled the courtroom before the foreman stood and pronounced the verdict. In the hush that followed, Faraday lifted his eyes, searching the faces of those he recognized: Lady Beaumont, covered in black; Constance Vale, pen immobilized; Hastings, shoulders bowed; and Poirot, mask of solemn tranquility. Sentencing was swift. The judge, stern and unbending, condemned Faraday to penal servitude for life. "Let this sentence," he intoned, "stand as a warning that no station, no fortune, places one above the law." Outside the court, reporters swarmed. Poirot and Hastings slipped away through a side exit, avoiding the tumult. Hastings ventured, "A tragic end, n'est-ce pas?" Poirot folded his hands. Indeed. Money and social standing did not spare him when blood was shed. Yet the law, like the little grey cells, demands order restored. The Beaumont household. Back at Beaumont House, the roses had been pruned and the pavilion repaired. Lady Beaumont returned to her duties, though her grand parties would never again echo with untroubled laughter. She invited Poirot and Hastings for one final luncheon in the morning room where the first interviews had taken place. The table was laid with autumnal flowers, no carnations among them, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and roast chestnuts. Over cups of Darjeeling, Lady Beaumont spoke quietly. "Monsieur Poirot, you have done us all a service, to Vivienne's memory, to justice, and to my household's peace." Her eyes, red-rimmed, conveyed gratitude perhaps deeper than words permitted. Poirot inclined his head. "Madam, justice is not vengeance. It is the restoration of balance." Hastings added, "And yet balance seldom feels like justice to those who grieve." Lady Beaumont nodded. "True. But without your work, the pavilion would remain a place of unanswered questions, and the roses a silent testament to horror." A final walk in the garden. Later that afternoon, Hastings accompanied Poirot to the Rose Garden Pavilion one last time. The ironwork, now repainted in ivory, gleamed beneath the low sun. Beneath it bloomed roses of every hue, pinks, apricots, whites, but no black carnations. Hastings stooped to touch a petal. "It seems harder, somehow, knowing what happened here." Poirot surveyed the scene with a thoughtful gaze. "And yet necessary, my friend. In this spot, life and death intertwined. But now the roses have blossomed anew, symbols of hope rather than sorrow." Hastings hesitated. "Do you think Lady Beaumont will hold another masquerade?" Poirot's thin smile held a wisp of humor. "Perhaps, but never in quite the same way. Masks can conceal, but they can also reveal truths. I suspect she will prefer open faces henceforth." Reflections on the little grey cells. That evening, back at Whitehaven Mansions, Poirot sat before his mantelpiece, a single candle flickering beside the framed invitation to the midnight masquerade. Hastings poured them each a glass of aperitif. This case, Hastings began, felt different. A crime of desperation rather than malice, but malice nonetheless. Poirot nodded, swirling the amber liquid. "True, Hastings. We saw money transform a polite request into a weapon. We saw a calling card turned into a symbol of vengeance. Yet always, the smallest detail, the broken shard, the borrowed key, the discarded bloom, guided us." Hastings sipped. "And what now, Poirot?" "Another case already awaits, I'm sure." Poirot laid down his glass, fingertips lightly touching the invitation's silver filigree. "Yes, mon ami. Tomorrow brings new puzzles, new masks to unmask, and new truths to uncover. But tonight, we rest, and give thanks that justice, though slow at times, does prevail." He rose, offering Hastings his arm. Together they looked out over the fog-wreathed London rooftops, knowing that in the silent streets below, more mysteries stirred, awaiting the touch of the little grey cells. And so ends the midnight masquerade, where masks fell not only from faces, but from hearts, revealing the frailties and courage that dwell within us all.